Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder, it's time to have a look at my hopes for War Thunder in 2019. So we've already gone over my predictions for what's going to happen, so that's what I actually think is going to happen. Now we're going to go through what I personally would like to see. So understand that this is pretty much all opinion, and it's obviously heavily biased towards what I would like, and I'll give justifications for why I believe in this stuff, and why I would like to see them in-game in general, and how it would benefit the game. But understand, a lot of these ideas I don't see coming to the game in a logical way, but would still like to see them anyway at some point. So, let's get started in true fashion with a notepad document. So the first thing to understand is I've been talking about for maybe 3 to 4 months at this point that we really need a parity in mechanics when it comes to top tier. Now, I understand that top tier is not the whole of the game, it is only a small part of the game, but it is a part which a lot of people idolize to get to when they're actually playing War Thunder. And right now, if you decide to grind down one of the, let's say, wrong trees, you're going to end up with a much more negative experience compared to the other trees that you may actually grind down. So for me, if I decide to grind down, let's say, the Japanese tree, I am left with the Type 90. The Type 90 is, well, arguably, I would actually say it is the best top tier tank. But it has very limited support in the form of CAS, in the form of secondary MBT, in the form of a scout, even though one just got added. It's still not top tier material, and even AA had top tier. It also has no helicopters, also has no ships, and all of this stuff. So for me, Japan, even though it has, the best top tier MBT, it needs a hell of a lot more to be competitive at top tier. And I think one of the biggest ways of dealing with this problem that I see is by giving each nation 2 or at least 2 top tier MBTs, because then we would have parity, at least in the main regard, which I see as affecting the game in ground forces. So the 4 nations that have top tier MBTs, so we have Britain, the US, Germany, and also the Soviets. So that means we need to find examples for the 3 other nations, France, Italy, and Japan. And for Japan, it's a little bit tough, but I think there will be squeezed in either another variant of the Type 90, or the STC, the Type 90 prototype, or the Type 74, maybe in the version of the G, which would give it, insane APFS DS. Italy, the Ariete is the easy one. Then you got the Romor with the DM33 round. But on top of that, you could also add in the Otto Melara M109L, which is a licensed-built M109 howitzer. Now, if you don't know what this is a big boy, I think would be the best way of putting it, and it would be the first donk gun that we see at top tier, and I think it is something that should be recognized at top tier, and also most tiers overall. The next one is France, and you've basically got the Leclerc, the 1993 tank, and then the AMX-32. But you already have the AMX-40, so there's your 2 top tier stuff, the Leclerc and the AMX-40, so yeah, you can have parity. As shown here, it is possible to have parity in this regard between the nations, and I think it should be something that is solved as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we are going to see the gap between the majorly played nations and the minorly played ones to just get even larger with new additions, such as new mechanics in the form of helicopters and everything else. The next one to have a look at is a focus on bringing out naval trees instead of expansion of existing ones. So, for me personally, I enjoy rank 1 and rank 2 of naval. I enjoy it from a fun point of view. And if you want to have a look at War Thunder, at the end of the day, it is a game. People will enjoy it for different reasons, whether it's the fun factor, whether it makes them smile, or whether it is the competitive aspect. For me, it's a mixture of a lot of stuff, and for Naval, the reason why I enjoy it is the fun factor, and I find Rank 1 and Rank 2 fun. I like the idea of running around with a bunch of small guns and basically peppering people as they pepper me while firing torpedoes all over the place and just going and whipping around like a crazy person doing it. And because of that, I find large ships incredibly boring, and I can't see how in the future I would ever find them fun. Now, understand that this is incredibly subjective, but this is also my list, so I'm allowed to be a little bit subjective in it. And I would therefore prefer them to focus on bringing out of the trees instead of larger ships, instead of stuff which, if it comes in the form of what we've seen with the light cruisers, where they don't add them all at the same time, then we're going to have general imbalances until they do add them all at the same time, which is what we're seeing, with the most recent light cruisers, which is a great change. But then you realize the stock grinds are awful, and you also find that only a specific amount of your audience wants to play one specific light cruiser over another, and yada yada yada. But the main thing for me is I want to see more fast boats, more torpedo-based, focused boats, more boats with lots of small caliber guns, which are interesting and fun to play, instead of massive ships which I sit 10 kilometers away and try and hit on and hope to get an ammo rack on a torpedo tube, or hope to set fire so many times that the crew gets sick of living. And the next one is kind of the same idea, but for helicopters. So give nations some semblance of a helicopter tree. It is no question that the top-tier helicopters, the AH-1Z and the Mi-35M, respectively, have an incredible effect on the meta of top-tier. If you get one AH-1Z in a battle, and he is able to get up very quickly, he or she can easily change the course of a battle within the first 5 minutes of existing. And the reason for this is because of the 16 ATGMs, or the 16 Hellfire missiles, and the inability for the enemy at the early stages of the game to be able to deal with that, to be able to counteract the helicopters that are flying about. Now, this is all well and good if you are a Soviet player and you yourself can get in a helicopter, or if you are a German player and you yourself can get in a helicopter. But what if you are another nation and you do not have access to helicopters? Well, you're just out of luck, aren't you? And to have a mechanic or to have a vehicle type like helicopters have this huge swing on games, and I'm basically talking about the top tier helicopters here, but having them have these huge swings on games and then literally not giving nations the ability to even consider using a said swing shows the imbalance that we have at the higher tiers. So I just don't like the idea of having this difference between the nations, which inherently forces the idea that there are major nations which get all of the toys, and then minor nations which don't. We have seen in War Thunder's expansion over 2018 that this has happened a lot, mainly with the three major nations and all of the other minor ones. It has got slightly better by the end of the year, but overall, we are seeing the three nations steamroll ahead because of stuff like helicopters, and also because of the fact that they have naval trees, and also because of the fact that they have access to stuff like supersonic jets and all of this wonderful things. I am sure if Germany had an easily accessible Mach 1 jet, they would have got it over Britain, before everybody else. So, for me, that has to be something that's considered as well, even more than the naval trees. because the naval trees in general is from an enjoyment factor, whereas the helicopter trees are from a point of view where if you don't fix this soon, people are going to get incredibly sick of it and then just leave. It isn't like they can just grind another tree, because this effect is always there at top tier. Now, as I said, I understand this only affects top tier, but since it is something that a lot of people want to do, it should be looked at. The next one is just expansion of vehicles, especially when it comes to the British and the Americans, and I'm sure a bunch of other nations have similar stuff. I know for a fact that Japan has the original Hori, which has like a massive gun on it, a massive low velocity gun on it. They also have it's either, I believe it's an SPG based on the Rogo chassis with a ridiculously large gun. I know for a fact that other nations have similar machines, but I just thought I'd bring up some examples of British machines so you can kind of get a picture. So I would love to see more howitzer vehicles, or large caliber vehicles, but mainly howitzer stuff. Stuff which wasn't exactly designed for tank-on-tank combat, but did see a massive use in the war. There is already a bunch of these in game. We saw an expansion of them this year in the form of the Type 75, the Centurion Avery, and then we've even had stuff like the FV4005, which are more suited to knocking down estate buildings than they are actual tanks. So my question is, why not take these ideas and expand on them further to create either tree vehicles or gift vehicles which have a little twist to them? A Churchill with a 95mm howitzer, the Centaur, which is very similar to the Cromwell that we have in the British tree with the 95mm, and why not expand it to even proper artillery vehicles, SPGs such as the Bishop, the Sexton, the Aramba with the 25-pounder. Yes, I don't forget about you Australians. So with that, there are a ton of vehicles. The Priest also comes to mind. Or even stuff such as the vehicles like the SU-122 we have in game, the SU-152. We have these howitzer machines already, but there are tons of others we could add to the game. The Hummel, the Vesp. The names go on, and I have no idea why they haven't really found a massive place in the game yet. Maybe it is the fact that they weren't really designed for tank-on-tank combat, but I think now would be a time to add them, just for a little bit of variety, if not anything else, from the normality of using guns which are just designed to poke holes. Why not get a gun which is designed to blow a hole instead? The next one is more 1920s and 1930s aircraft. Even World War I aircraft would be nice. There was a ton of interesting stuff going on in the 20s and 30s. I see it as kind of the baby period, especially the 20s. It was a wonderful period of aircraft design. People didn't exactly know what was good, people didn't exactly know what was bad, and a lot of people were trying a lot of different things, and these are represented in museums across the world, and I would love to see them represented in War Thunder because they are really interesting. You have a lot of large-scale biplanes or monoplanes which were designed for specific purposes. You have even stuff such as, you could talk about the early TB3 and the early idea of, parachuting tanks in or gliding tanks onto the ground. There is a ton of weird and wonderful stuff that can be found in the 1920s and the 1930s when it comes to aircraft, and I think it should definitely be explored for said reason. I just do that. I've got to expand it a little bit because I've just realized it doesn't fit properly. So let's just do that real quick and then close that. I love doing stuff on the fly. It's always fun. Babadi boopy. Que cosa. There you go. Get a bit more picture now. So, I think there are some really cool and interesting designs. The speed isn't too much of an issue. As we've seen, biplane combat in general in-game is very fun. It's very much all over the place, I think is the way to call it. It's a little bit hectic at times, especially when it comes to arcade and also realistic. But there are so many interesting, cool stuff we could see. So I hope we see more of a focus on the interwar period at some point this year. On top of this, a lot of people talk about World War I tanks. They talk about interwar period tanks. For me, I don't really share the same opinion that I do for aircraft. So aircraft I would love to see in the game, but when it comes to the ground vehicles, I kind of see, like, there's a... the stuff I find fun and competitive in ground vehicles is speed, obviously a decent gun, accuracy helps a lot, frontal armor, things like this. But when I look at interwar tanks or even World War I tanks, what I see is incredibly slow vehicles with really bad efficiency rates, low velocity guns, and massive imbalances between nations when it comes to what they produce. One thing about the aircraft is you can point towards aircraft from each nation and go, okay, they made this, we can add it to the game, we can balance it around that fact. With the tanks, it was either copies of pre-existing vehicles or kind of license-built endeavors which pushed people forward, especially in the late 20s, early 30s. So for me, I would much prefer a focus on the aircraft of that period instead of the ground forces. The next one is something that is kind of new, but does expand on a point I've been talking about for a while. So, Airfield EC mechanics put into other game modes and also expanded. If you didn't know, we got a... what would you call it? There was a dev blog talking about modular airfields in Enduring Confrontation. This stuff was added in update 1.85, and the idea is it splits the airfield into 4 congruent parts, and if you knock out one of the congruent parts, it means that another part of it is either lessened or cannot be used because of that part being destroyed. So you have interlinking areas, and therefore there is a little bit of a tactic to what you actually take out first. So I really like this idea, and I think it could work really well in arcade and definitely really well in air realistic, especially with the new locations that they've added, such as the Lake Ladoga map, where they have multiple airfields. So you can bomb out parts of one airfield to force, the enemy to go to the other airfield. I think that would be really cool. And this would mean that the maps would need more than one airfield, just so, you can't just bomb it out and then Bob's your uncle. You just have to wait and win the game. But this could easily be done. The majority of maps that I see already have 2 airfields, at least on one side, and all you'd have to do is plonk one, on the other end of the map. So let's say you have an airfield in the southeast, you stick one in the southwest. And then if you have one in the northeast, you stick it in the northwest. If you have one in the center, you stick it in either. You basically just do it like that. But I think this idea can be expanded upon in this way and would be wonderful to see. I would add areas to the airfields, though. I would first of all change the name of the residential area, because I really don't think it's a good idea to call it the residential area. I would also add something like a command point, which would be just a bunker block building, and the idea is if you take that out, then it would reduce radio communication between people, or it would reduce effectiveness of AA around the airfield itself. I think that would be cool. And then also a train area or some kind of train stop. This leads into when I talk about bases here. So let's talk about bases and then get to the train idea. So for a modular base, now if you don't know what a base is, basically in Air Realistic and Air Arcade, you have to normally bomb out 3 bases or more, and then you get to bomb out the airfield. If you bomb out the bases, then said airfield, you win the game. That's Well, 99% of the time you win the game, unless your team gets taken out before the tickets, go down to 0. So, these bases are important, therefore they should be expanded upon, therefore they should be defined. I would define them into 3 separate areas: supply, production, transport. So, supply would indicate an area where you load supply trucks. Production would be a factory area where you actually make the stuff, and transport would be linked to the train. And now, this is where it gets interesting. So, there are continuous supplies which are moving between the bases. The bases themselves get repaired once these supplies hit the base. If you completely destroy a base, then the supplies will therefore be used to rebuild a base, but they have to get to 100% before the base is fully functional once again. Very similar to how we see the Airfield EC mechanics working, well, in EC. So, in order to stop the reconstruction of the bases, you first of all have to take out all of the bases, and in the time period it takes the train to get to the closest the closest base, you have to annihilate the airfield, or you either have to annihilate the train area on the airfield or the transport area on the modular base, because that is where the train is going to get to, and if the train gets there, it automatically reconstructs your base, which is closest to the airfield. Therefore, it can continue the supply of the other bases to get them back up and running. Do you kind of get what I mean? It might be a little bit confusing, so I might do an individual video about it, but the idea is to link these areas together. Right now, the way I see AirRB and Air Arcade is there is no difference between each of the bases. So there is no interesting thing about the bases. They're all just points to flatten. If we add in more interesting ideas when it comes to actually flowing of the map, then it will be more interesting, at least to me. So I would do that. That's how I would run the whole thing. Then the battlefield line. So this is another enduring confrontation mechanic which was added in earlier in the year. This just shows the offensive and defensive sides and where they line up. I think this would be good to add in, just so people can kind of get a flow of how the battlefield's going, because a lot of people can look at the ticket counter and be like, oh, we're losing, but the map itself might actually show that you are winning, because there is no way for one side to be able to kill your ground targets, but your side can kill theirs. Therefore, you will eventually win, but because of the way that the tickets are, maybe you're not sure about how the map works and everything like that, then you believe something which is untrue. So for me, I think it would be a good idea to add in a battlefield line to give a visual representation of what's going on the battlefield. The next one is some additional mechanics on top of pre-existing ones and their expansion. So the first one is trains, as I said, it basically supplies bases. So if a base goes down and there is no supply line to it from another base, a train is set off to be able to reconstruct said base. Now, this train can be destroyed through small arms fire. The enemy team will be alerted when a train is set off. Also, if you destroy the train stop or the transport, it stops the train. So overall, there's a lot of ways of taking out the train, but it does. The reason why to bring in a train like this is it creates a point of focus after the first 5 to 10 minutes of a battle where people can actually fight. So one of the biggest issues we have in War Thunder is after the initial hit in Air Realistic, we get to a point where people go back to their bases, they're done with the fight, and what happens is they either stay near their bases or they wait until the vehicles spawn and then try and venture out, and if they can't venture out, they'll just stay near their bases and the enemy team will have to bleed them out using tickets. Well, what if we created scenarios around the 5 to 10 minute mark, which would mean that secondary and tertiary battles took place, and therefore would be able to force people away from their airfields to fight in the honourable way which a lot of people believe in. I think trains could be one of these mechanics which do it, because there would be a massive incentive for somebody to get up their base once again, because once one of the bases is up, it is able to unlock the other bases, which could give some kind of benefit to, the individual's team. So, yeah, I think putting it in just for that fact alone, not looking at the historical or the realistic ideals, just looking at a pragmatic point of view, that would be why I would add them in. Paratroopers. So paratroopers is something I brought up what seems like 2 years ago at this point. And the idea would be with paratroopers is that they would send in from either side, both sides would send in offensive paratroopers. They would take points of, what would be the word? Points of excellence? No. Points of where people want, pretty much. So they would take these areas. They would normally be either towns or villages or cities or bridges, and the idea would be is they would set up shop in this little zone. This would create a pocket of resistance for you to take out. Once you take out the pocket of resistance, therefore you get your supply lines back, therefore you get, more tickets back, and so on and so forth. The idea would be you would lose tickets when the paratroopers land, and if you take them out, you gain back those tickets that you lost. I think that would be a great way of doing it, and it would mean that you have an incentive to either shoot down the paratrooper planes, you have an incentive to shoot them down while they're in the air, or you have an incentive to annihilate them on the ground when they will have a base of AA fire available to them, and also some maybe light arms fire in the form of armoured cars or in the form of other tank guns. So for me, I would love to see that. I think that would be really cool and interesting, to be honest. And I've done some videos in the past looking at paratroopers, and I pretty much go through how it would work on specific maps. If you want to see those examples, just type in, paratrooper into the search bar on my channel, and it'll come up with them. The last one is AI squadrons. Now, something that I have strived for in War Thunder is to make the experience less about the individual and more about the overall battle. Like, I understand the importance of making somebody feel like a hero, but what if you can mix the idea of creating a war or an operation with the idea of also being a hero? So the way that you do this is you take the Blazing Angels way of doing things, and you create an AI squadron around the player. So you create a set of 3 aircraft which you can command under you as the player, but they are AI, so they're brain dead. But you actually feel like you're in command. You have some easy commands such as defend, support, and be aggressive or attack, and you can tell them where to attack, you can tell them where to defend, all of this stuff. You have complete control. So in the end, you are still the hero, but there is more stuff going on in the sky, and it is harder to work out who is a player, who is an AI, and therefore the match becomes a hell of a lot more interesting, and it actually feels like an operation. Because right now, when I go into an RRB battle, or an enduring confrontation battle, it doesn't feel like an operation, it doesn't feel like an actual battle, it doesn't feel like a war. Instead, what it feels like is 8 people going against 8 people and smashing their heads together to see who's better. I think War Thunder can easily be better than that in many ways, and it has shown over the years that it is better than that in many ways, by not just being, a fighter-on-fighter game, by incorporating other mechanics while going forward, and also a plethora of other game modes which have also, come with it. So for me, when I look at squadrons, I see it like that. On top of this, it could also be, in EC or a realistic, you just have like a squad of 4, planes going around the skies. These would not be designed to spot people like the old ones were, which was the biggest issue with them, but would just be there to cause interference or cause confusion, or just be there to kill, to be honest. So that could be another thing. Remember back in the day when we had spotter planes and recon planes and stuff like the was it the Ju-87s? No, they weren't Ju-87s on Norway. I can't remember what they were now. B-25s maybe, which used to go in a circle in the centre. Oh god, that was a long time ago. Anyway, the next one is just a few personal ones. There has been an Avro Shackleton in the files for a long time. Please get it out and bring it to game. I would love to see that. Also, two other ones, the Blackburn Skua. It would be completely useless in the game, but I would love to see it, and the Whitworth Whitley, because I will never be happy until my pencil bomber from good old Blighty is finally in the game. And then one of the last ones is an IS-7 style event. Now, a lot of people didn't like this event, and I don't really understand why. The only thing I can think of is that people found it confusing, people found it a grind compared to normal events, and that was the issue. For me, when I actually look at the amount of hours that it took me to do this event compared to the standard ones, it was easier than those events. It took me a lot less time, and it also took me a lot less days. I could concentrate on it for a few days instead of having to think about it for a month. So for me, the IS-7 event worked pretty well. On top of this, the issue with the festive event and the good old summer event, as it was last year, was that it emphasizes individual play constantly. The only thing that doesn't is the assists, and you'll get them going over time. They are not a very cooperative, idea. Whereas when it came to the IS-7 event, there was a true feel of a community vibe when it came to it. People were working together to work out the recipes. People were coming together to play together because you didn't really need anything but time and play time. So people would squad up more, people would talk about the events of the IS-7 itself being quite an iconic vehicle. That got a lot of people talking. There was a ton of stuff here for the IS-7 style event that I think about, which could easily be incorporated in another event which is similar next year, with the building idea, the workshop idea, and, the recipe idea, and the community idea. I thought they were all great ideas. I know that the community in general seemed quite negative about it, but I bet you if you talk to people today, and you just said to them, what did you actually think of the workshop mechanic, the actual building of it? The majority will say, I liked it, but it was a bit too confusing. There was a few too many parts going on at once. So maybe that is something, if we make it easier, or make it a bit more refined for people, or point them towards the directions where, the answers have been solved from a community point of view, maybe that's how we get people on board on an IS-7 style event. I do like the festive events, the good old summer event, and all of the other challenge events, let's call it. But I really loved the IS-7 event. I would definitely not do it with a vehicle which has the same strength of the IS-7, though. I would give it to a vehicle which is iconic, but not meta-defining. So something that a lot of people know, a lot of people are interested in, but generally wouldn't be in the normal tech tree, and it can't be meta-defining, because if it's meta-defining, you're giving the best vehicle to the most experienced players who have ground it out. You can't do that. It's an awful idea. KV-220 and ersatz say, why this is a bad idea. So you could do like the pancake, the one that we covered the other day, or the flapjack, as I know it. But yeah, the pancake could work, or something like that. So there is opportunities there for an IS-7 style event, and I really want to see it. I would like to see some variety with the events. Another thing which I haven't written down, which I should have, Talking about the parity angle once again, so with helicopters, with top tunes, and this, there are many gaps in many trees that have been there for a very long time. And this is basically a gaps in mechanics. So, the classic examples I bring up is the fact that the British tree has little to no scouts, and the scouts that it does have are very far apart in BR, and there are also real-world historical examples that you could easily put in the tree to fill these gaps. There's also the gaps of such as the Soviet 47 to 77 AA gap, that's also present for the British. The Japanese have gaps as well, especially in their rank 5 lineups around 7-7 and 8-0 and 8-3. So there are gaps that are stopping nations from having, full lineups. So that is something I would like to be focused on instead. Instead of giving us, new top tier stuff, instead of giving us, new supersonic jets, why not fill the areas which are glaring, at least to me, in the tech trees? There are many of them I have gone over, over this year, but the main ones are the lack of scouts for specific nations, and a lack of AA for other ones at specific ranges of BR. So a focus more on parity than exclusives, I think, is the way to go. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was very fun to make and also very fun to think about. And if you want to see more stuff like this, let me know. And on top of this, what do you want to see? Because as a community, it is always interesting to see what different people want. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.